Hello and what's up, political peeps? Today I am joined by the candidate for Connecticut's 28th State Senate District, who also serves on the Fairfield RTM, Mr. Rob Blanchard. Mr. Blanchard, welcome to the GeoPolitical.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on, talk more about your life, your career in policy, and your plans for running in Connecticut's 28th State Senate District seat. So let's dive right into talking more about your life. So you graduated from Syracuse University, and then you came to Connecticut to start your career in public service. Can you
Sure.
tell us more about how you chose Connecticut and what Connecticut means to you?
Absolutely. Like a lot of college students, I graduated not fully knowing exactly what career path I wanted to take in my senior year at Syracuse. And it was a requirement to graduate that I take a political science course where you intern with an elected official. And I chose an internship with U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York. And it was an incredible opportunity where I really got a chance to see how government works and how it can help people and how we can advocate on behalf of the public for really good policies. And that's essentially where the bug kind of bit me. I was down in Washington D.C. In another congressman's office and looking to kind of continue to kind of travel on my path of public service and policy, and got an opportunity to come to a competitive gubernatorial race in 2010 that was a long shot. Connecticut hadn't had a Democratic governor for almost 30 years, and so I had friends in Connecticut and Greenwich, and my wife is from this area. We hadn't met at that point, but I came to Connecticut and really started to kind of build on that, and loved the people I met in Connecticut and throughout Fairfield County where I was based, and we ended up winning that election narrowly, one of the closest gubernatorial races in state history. Um, and then kind of continued on that path, working for other elected officials. But Connecticut is great. It's my home now. It's where I've met my wife. It's where we're raising our family here in Fairfield, where she grew up. And the people have been tremendously warm and welcoming since I got here, and it's really been an incredible opportunity to build a career and a life here.
Definitely. And you mentioned you were working with Chuck Schumer originally after graduating for your internship. How did that experience kind of help you and has helped you throughout your career as you've made your way up into state government?
Sure. So I actually interned with Chuck Schumer in his Syracuse office in upstate New York, and you think about how far Syracuse, New York, is from Washington D.C. And Senator Schumer was there 2 or 3 times a week, and again, it was during the Great Recession when he was advocating for consumer friendly policies, taking on the banks during the foreclosure crisis, when people were losing their homes, when banks were kind of raking in huge profits. And that sort of advocacy on behalf of the public, it really kind of shaped sort of my interest in that. We hear a lot of frustrations with government, but here we've got a U.S. senator who's on the ground in a massive state, a few times a week, really making sure that we're pushing for policies that make the middle class whole again after that collapse. And sort of that kind of shaped my interest in what can be done. New York, Syracuse area there was sort of reinventing itself as sort of a post-industrial Rust Belt, and Chuck was really working to make sure that they got the economic stimulus that they needed to kind of continue to be economically successful.
Understood. Now, I do want to talk more about the start of your personal career. Tell us more about your early positions in policy in Connecticut.
Sure. So I did some more campaign work, and then the 24/7 grind of campaigns can certainly take a toll on you. And so I got the opportunity to join Connecticut Attorney General George Jepson's office in 2012, where I spent 4 years kind of running all over the state with him, and really watching how Connecticut's largest law firm, if you will, it works in action. And with a couple hundred attorneys, the AG's office was tackling everything from the opioid crisis to, again, holding the banks accountable for the foreclosure crisis, and then also advocating for some really good, environmental causes on behalf of the state. And so you learn how the AG's office sort of fits into every nook and cranny within state government, and our society and community as a whole. But right after that, I had gone to work for Ted Kennedy Jr., who's a good friend now. I was running for state senate. And then shortly after that, I got linked up with Ned Lamont, who, interestingly enough, had come back from after running for governor in 2010 to enter the race for governor in 2018 to really focus on turning our state's economy around. And so I was one of Ned's first hires on that 2018 campaign, where I worked on building political relationships and communications, and ultimately ended up going on to serve in his administration for almost 3 years.
Understood. Now, I want to talk more about your current campaign. So, tell us more about your goals for the district as a whole
Mhm.
and how you think you can improve it.
Great. So the district as a whole is a pretty large swath of towns. It's every Senate district is about 100,000 people, and this district includes Fairfield, Easton, Newtown, and Bethel. And each of those four towns, as with many towns throughout the state of Connecticut, all have their unique interests and concerns and priorities. But there's also a lot of issues that kind of don't or that cross state lines, like the affordability issues that a lot of families are facing, the cost of living, things like ways to lower our utility costs or better access to more affordable health care. And so I'm looking to kind of bring the years of service I have serving at the local level, where I've advocated for investments in education and keeping neighborhood schools well funded and open, and in the state government side currently, where I serve as the Chief of Staff to the state Comptroller. And so I'm looking to bring both of those the professional and local elected experiences together so that we can sort of advocate for what I call the next generation of leadership. Some of these problems are systemic in a way, but we have made significant progress, especially under Governor Lamont, on addressing them. But it's going to take some work to kind of rein in our costs and find ways to cut taxes and also be economically competitive.
And how did you decide to specifically want to improve the condition in the district, in the state senate, compared to other roles? How did you land on running for senate?
So you certainly have a calling to public service, and that's what I had going back throughout the inception of my career. And serving on the RTM, when you go door to door to meet voters and hear about the issues that are important to them, you find that a lot of these issues are also ones that are based at the state level. And so it becomes even more personal, I think, when you have a family and you're feeling some of those burdensome costs that you didn't before, like higher grocery bills or higher daycare costs. And so now that we're back, now that we're in Fairfield, where again my wife grew up and her parents and grandparents grew up, I saw an opportunity to kind of expand on the work that I've done as a local elected official by tackling some of these challenges that are at the state level as well. And so it's a really unique way to address some of these issues and also kind of put that experience into action.
Now, can you elaborate more on what you think your personal leadership style is and how that will be useful in this role in the Senate?
Sure. So my style is always listening and collaborating. I think are the two most important things. I've got a decent wealth of knowledge when it comes to policy issues, but I don't know everything. And so I like to be someone who's hands on and on the ground and listening to uh, constituents or nonprofits or businesses, touring them, holding roundtables, really understanding how our state policies or funding impacts them in a way that's beneficial, or maybe there's a shortfall. But I'm also someone who knows that it's never up to one legislator or one elected official or one community organization, that it takes everyone. And so I really like to find ways to bring other people into the fold, other nonprofits, other maybe teachers or students like yourself, or other elected officials who may share the concerns for some of these issues or policies that we need to focus on. And so when you bring people together and when you listen, I think you can certainly find ways to develop the best outcome.
And during your race, when you're pushing for all these issues and you're going and campaigning and holding these roundtables, as you mentioned, what challenges have you faced? And given that Senator Wang has held the seat for many, many years, what challenges have you faced in a way sway voters?
Sure. So I think, like I said, listening. I started my campaign early in January. I started going door to door in April and just knocking on their door and introducing myself in some cases and saying, what issues are most important to you, or where can I potentially be helpful if I were your state senator?
Mm.
And people really do want to talk about the things that are concerning to them: the cost of living, the affordability, housing, access to housing. And so people seem also energized and yearning for sort of that new, fresh perspective and a new voice and a new way of doing things. Because, like I said, some of these problems have been decades in the making. And again, while I'm not someone who can turn the state around single handedly, I think that kind of, having that new voice up there and kind of having a new approach to some of these challenges, it can be the difference. This is a race that was decided by 636 votes last time. It's going to be incredibly close, a little over 1%. And so people's votes truly do matter. But this is an opportunity to change course and send someone there who's going to represent your values and really advocate on behalf of the issues that you care most about.
Well, thank you for telling us a little bit more about yourself there. Now, on the topic of these issues, I want to discuss some of your policy and dive deeper into your views and more in talk and discuss more about the changes you're going to make in the Senate.
Mhm.
So, with Connecticut's increasing cost of living, a huge part of your campaign has been cutting taxes and providing more relief for middle class families.
Mhm.
Can you discuss with me a little bit more about the specific ways on how you're going to conquer this challenging task?
Absolutely. So I think if we can find ways to, next year's budget is going to be an important one, and if we can find ways to ensure that we're being responsible and funding nonprofits where we need to, obviously we're going to have to do it this year without the use of ARPA funds as we did in the last budget. If we can fund our nonprofits and help those who are dealing with mental health crises or other issues, that's going to be very important. But I also think if we can find ways to keep cutting taxes for middle class families, or use things like the child tax credit, which was a successful policy that was in the 2022 session for the fiscal 23 budget, was great. Families right after the pandemic used that funding for things like art camp or music lessons or things to help their children before they went back to school after really having one of the hardest summers they've probably ever had to imagine because of the pandemic. If we can look at things like the earned income tax credit for families and expanding that, but there's also small things we can do for our seniors and veterans and other tax relief too that I definitely would want to look at, because those are the policies that are going to attract people to our state if we can be a lower cost state. But it's also going to allow people to retire here to see their kids and grandkids. And so that the budget is going to be one of the most important things that we can do as a legislator, and that's what I can't wait to dive into if I'm elected.
And how will you balance those tax relief measures that you just mentioned with also not compromising other public services such as education and other types of like infrastructural developments?
That's a great question, and that is something that all 186 of us in the House and the Senate next year are going to have to address. It's the needs have not decreased. We've got to still fund higher education. We've got to fund our nonprofits. We've got to fund our towns so that when they invest in things like education or roads, property taxes can stay lower or more predictable rather than having to go up. And so every budget is in a way a reflection of our values, but it's also a process of competing interests. There's discussion, as you might have seen, of moving the public benefits portion of our utility bill into the budget, which could certainly crowd things out. I totally sympathize with people's frustrations over the high utility costs, which is another thing that needs to be addressed. But we've got to take a look at our budget, which has a good percentage of it are fixed costs, things that we have to change that we can't defer. We've got to pay down our pension liabilities so that young uh, families and people aren't burdened with that debt for generations to come, and it frees up more money for things that you just discussed or mentioned. But it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be the first budget in a little while again that we don't have that extra income from ARPA, and the needs are just as high as ever. But we can't defer funding those needs, because if you do, they sometimes get worse.
Understood. And now I do want us to talk specifically about utilities and the prices of them for just a couple minutes here. But how, from your viewpoint, how do you think that utilities have gotten so expensive in Connecticut? And what steps specifically can you take to bring down costs
Mhm.
for residents in that area?
I think we could probably do a whole interview and special on the cost of utilities separate from this because it would take so long to explain the history of the deregulation. But it's an issue that is plaguing our state's economy, and it's burdensome for seniors and families. We can attract a major manufacturer to our state, for example, if our energy rates are high. For families who budget each month how expensive their bills are going to be, those unpredictable spikes are just the worst thing that you can imagine in July. And so years of deregulation of our markets have allowed this to go up. The supply and demand, simple economics. We
Mhm.
can't generate enough power to meet demand. Have made the cost going up. This 2017 Millstone deal that you may have heard about, a guaranteed rate of return has also made the rates in a lot of ways unaffordable. So I think we need to ensure that one, we're finding ways to generate more power,
Mhm.
but it's also going to have to be in a way that is more than just wind and solar because those require some upfront capital and can be expensive, and the ROI for some investors may not be what it needs to be. But we've also got to find a way to partner with other regional states, New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, who are faced with these same challenges as well. But if we and community aggregation pricing is something that we took a look at here on the RTM in Fairfield that, if done the right way, from what we understand, can prevent those July spikes and provide more reliability and predictability on our bills. But it needs to be addressed. I think the special session gimmick by the Republicans to go in there and claw back the ARPA money that was allocated already to education and nonprofits and give it to the utilities is not the right move. A lot of people have said we don't want $20 or $30 off on our bill. We want this problem fixed long term, and I feel for them. And that's definitely going to be something that needs to be addressed in a meaningful way long term next session.
Agreed. And you mentioned solar and other forms of different energy in that answer there. I do want to talk about climate change quickly, which is another thing that we could talk about for a long time. But
Absolutely.
in Connecticut, it is a growing and controversial issue on how climate change can be handled. So how would you handle that?
Yeah, I think Connecticut, unfortunately, has fallen behind other states like Massachusetts when it comes to addressing climate change. We haven't had any meaningful climate policy in, I think, two legislative sessions. Previous attempts in the last session were unsuccessful. And there's no denying the fact that we've had every July the hottest July on record, and that record is just going to break every year after. And we've seen the devastation that these hurricanes are now having in the southern part of our country. And so Connecticut, while a small state, can really help to lead the way along with other New England states to combat climate change and the impact. And that means more enforcement, more stringent regulatory policies that bring down reduce greenhouse gases. I think it's okay to be ambitious, as Massachusetts has been with their carbon neutral plan by 2050. But you've got to put funding behind it, and you've got to have benchmarks that are realistic. Because if we don't, we're never going to achieve the success that we need. And so that's everything from making sure we've invested in our grid that we can handle EVs, incentivizing people to purchase EVs, and also encouraging the behavior that's going to slow down the impact of climate change. And especially in a place like Fairfield, where you see the devastation from coastal erosion, and ensuring that we're more resilient and sustainable. It can be done at the community level. We've got Sustainable Fairfield that's doing their part, but we've got to do more as a state to make sure that we don't fall behind and don't feel the impact of climate change even more.
Understood, but another component to climate change and us being greener is you mentioned the use of cars and private
Mhm.
vehicles, uh, and the I-95 and Merritt Parkway corridors, of course, are frequently congested,
Absolutely.
and that's a big thing that has to be improved upon to infrastructural developments and other types of improvements. How can we make these corridors less congested to, number one, be better for the climate, and
Mhm.
number two, make people's trip to work less stressful?
Sure, and I would add number 3 in there, which is it's a public health issue as well. I mean, asthma rates around congested highways are higher because of the density of our urban communities. It's a fact that someone that a child in over the line in Bridgeport there is going to have a higher a chance of asthma and respiratory illness because of the congestion of exhaust or trash burning plants that are nearby there. And so it's upon all of us to not only look at our environmental initiatives as good for the environment, but also as a public health measure as well. And so that means also investing in green mass transit, cleaner buses, making sure Metro North is aligned with people's work schedules to not only get them off the road, but also get them to work in a way that is cleaner for our environment, is makes traffic less congested, and again also benefits our economy because people can get to and from in places without sitting in traffic or breathing in that exhaust, or again contributing to global warming. But it starts with reimagining and redesigning some of our roadways, some of our highways. It's going to take a collaboration with the federal government using some of that Build Back Better funding to sort of get those shovels into the ground and start getting our highways to a better place.
And you mentioned public transportation in there, and I personally think that that is a great way to get people off the roads. But to get people who are in a society that is so reliant on private transportation to use mass transit, we have to make them feel safe, and we have to, I guess, in a way, make mass transit more convenient than their own private transportation. How do you think we can get more people to transition away from their private vehicles?
I think it starts with making sure that mass transit becomes a little more reliable. A lot of people that I've talked to in Fairfield that commute into Manhattan don't love the fact that either the trains come at a time that are always full, which means maybe we need more frequent rail service because New York, for commuters who go into New York, they're back to work. It's not so much remote. They're in 3 or 5 days a week. And so we need Metro North to really either return to what it was before the pandemic or sort of, again, reimagining our trains to line up with people's work schedules. But people will tell me the express train to get out of there when I want to get home to see my kids or want to get home for bedtime it doesn't line up with my work schedule. 4 o'clock is when it'll come. They work until 5:30, then they're home by 7 or 8, and that's just not reliable. And so people find that it's easier to control their own way of commuting if it's by car, and that again adds to the traffic. And so if we can get Metro North to be more reliable and more aligned with people's work schedules, again, it'll enhance people's quality of life. It'll get them off the road, out of traffic, and be better for our economy and environment. That's the thing that I definitely want to work on if I get elected, is partnering with Metro North and our state DOT to sort of redesign our train times.
I agree with that, and those trains are a huge component, improving them and I guess revitalizing them to make them run at more frequent rates. But
Mhm.
a huge part of taking public transportation and a huge deterrent for people is that last mile of the journey,
Mhm.
getting home from the train station or wherever they're getting off their main form of public transportation. What is Connecticut, in your eyes? What is Connecticut's solution to the last mile?
Yeah, it's a great question because we've actually fallen behind. Our trains have gotten slower than they were decades ago, and some of that is because we slow down on antiquated bridges that may not be stable or strong enough to handle a train at a certain speed. Some of it is federal policy that requires us to slow down for safety reasons around curves or when switching tracks. And so I think it's really going to be important to make sure that we're looking to strengthen those bridges where we can so that you can speed up a bit. That we're looking, again, partnering with our federal policy, a federal delegation to say these policies were well intentioned. Maybe there's another way to approach this. And then also making sure that we invest in trains that can safely go at a speed to get people there quicker so that that last mile isn't stuck on the track or stuck in a terminal waiting to go.
Yeah, and in addition to this, another component to taking public transportation is like people's safety, and some
Mhm.
people feel concerned going on these public modes of transportation. How can it be ensured that people feel safer when using buses for their last mile and trains to
Yeah,
get to and
I,
from work?
I would say that given the amount of tragedies we've seen the last few years on our roadways through distracted drivers, wrong way drivers,
Mhm.
um, drivers under the influence of substances, or uh, the fatalities, it's a real tragedy. And so a lot of people have talked to me about how they just don't feel safe on our roads anymore. And so looking at ways to encourage mass transit is a way to not only reduce traffic fatalities, but it's a way to feel safer about getting home from work or getting to work. My wife and I live near a train station, and we'll take the train one stop downtown. It's convenient, it's safe, and allows us to get to our destination without the risk of a distracted driver. But these kind of ways are only attractive for people to use mass transit if and safer if it actually is something that they can count on and rely on.
Agreed. And now, my last question about public transportation: do you think that Connecticut does a feasible, is a possible future for Connecticut? Oh, excuse me, I don't know what I'm saying. Do you think Connecticut has a possible future with more people using public transportation? Is that feasible?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I work in Hartford, and right now I could jump out the back door to the train platform and take it all the way to Hartford, but we've got to work on our connections, and that's everything from the Waterbury branch to the Connecticut rail line. It would take me almost the same time to get to Hartford as it would to drive, and so when that ends up happening, it doesn't become convenient. If I can't at least capture that hour back on the train or hour and a half back on the train via productivity, Wi-Fi working, getting caught up on emails, um, writing documents, things like that, that's a trade-off for some people. You do 6 or so hours in the office and you can get the hour and a half back working on the train. But if we don't have Wi-Fi or connectivity on our trains, it's a 10-hour day now. We've lost that opportunity. So I think that if we can make sure that people who are sort of commuting or our buses are getting to the places where we need them to, or that there's Wi-Fi on our trains, then you can again attract people to say, "I'll take the train. It's quicker, it's safer. I can get my work done. I can get home to my family." But it takes the state making some serious investments along with Metro North really wanting to attract people to use it, and DOT making sure that we've got the infrastructure to handle it.
I understand, and I definitely agree with those points. And before, we did talk about safety on public transportation, and that's been a huge part of your campaign, the general safety of citizens in Connecticut, and particularly with Connecticut's history, is actually in the 28th state Senate district with gun violence, given
Mhm.
the 2012 Sandy Hook shootings. How will you continue to combat the threat of gun violence throughout the nation if you get elected next month?
It's certainly an epidemic, and it's a tragedy. And beyond Newtown as well, parents will tell me I'm worried about dropping my kid off at school. I'm worried about if I'll get to pick them up and see them again. And people have this natural fear of being in public places because that's where these tragedies happen. Um, I think we've got to do something. It's the choice to do nothing doesn't exist for me. And so that's why I think looking at our red flag laws is definitely something we can consider, which takes the guns out of hands of dangerous offenders or those who may be making threats online or those who may be suffering from a mental health issue. I think that ways to strengthen some of our background check and safe storage laws. But I also think investments in things, programs like Project Longevity, which is more proactive at reducing the threat of gun violence through proactive measures, community relationship building, are really good ways to do it. There's incredible nonprofits and gun safety advocacy organizations that I would love to partner with to see what can be done to strengthen our gun safety laws and to make people feel safe. I think it also means that we've got to partner with our state and local police to make sure that we've got the people on the roads and in our community to prevent these tragedies from happening as well. Certainly, if there's less guns in our communities, there's less to worry about. But I also think partnering with law enforcement is an approach that we need to consider. Um, but there's a lot of issues at hand here. And so I want to partner with all those community organizations. I want to hear from them about what's working. I think there's other states that may be moving ahead with some good policies that we could take a look at. but I want to hear from the advocates about what they think, where the gaps are and where we can be better and safer and stronger.
And while this gun control is crucial for the safety of the citizens of our state and the citizens of the nation, it is also a crucial component of this is giving law-abiding citizens that are abiding by the Second Amendment the right to bear arms. So how will you balance these gun safety laws while also allowing people, law-abiding citizens, to maintain their right to bear arms?
So the things that I discussed, that I've talked to people who are gun owners, and I believe that a lot of gun owners do want gun safety, and a lot of the measures that we've talked about, safe storage, locking your gun up, not having the need for dozens and dozens of guns, not needing AR-15s, going through a background check, not having ghost guns or 3D printed guns, or if someone is dangerous, should they have a gun? These are policies that aren't extreme, and that I think gun owners typically think that they agree with. They're common sense policies, and some of the gun legislation that I mentioned, while some of it may be passed along party lines, a lot of it, in some cases, was bipartisan. And so it's important that that we really make sure that we're putting the public safeties at the forefront of these issues. But I think a lot of them gun owners wouldn't agree with or wouldn't disagree are in the public's best interest.
Agreed. Now, I do want to transition from this and talk about another big component of your campaign. It's been a huge thing that you've advocated for has been making the American dream attainable again. So, the first question I have for you on that topic is, how do you think we got to the point where we have to say that, and where the American dream is no longer attainable in your eyes?
Yeah, I think the American dream is different for everyone, but I think it's centered around the idea of opportunity and sort of financial independence, and that whether it's you or your children or your grandchildren, that they have the best opportunity in life, and hopefully do in some ways better than you, right? Um, you know, we're in Fairfield now, and we couldn't afford to buy the home that my wife grew up in here. And the irony is that her grandfather was a realtor here in town, and it's tough. And so, how can you afford a home without while paying an expensive rent? How can you afford childcare on top of that? And so, I think families are feeling a lot of ways like they're falling behind, like they're always living paycheck to paycheck, or they're always playing catch up, or just when they think they've gotten ahead, a utility bill goes up, or a property tax bill goes up. And I think that in a lot of ways, government has worked to address some of the challenges in our state, especially some of those systemic ones. But there's also ways that government sometimes can feel burdensome for people. And so I think that working on really addressing some of the costs where we can, government can't set the price always of things like gas, and we can't make utility bills go down to zero. But we can work on ways to lower utility bills. We can make sure that we can lower things like the income tax where we can. We can't make groceries next to nothing, but we can work to not contribute to these high costs for a lot of families and small businesses. And so that's where I want to make sure that we're addressing some of those challenges to make people feel like they can get ahead, like they can have that opportunity. Like we're investing in pipelines and partnerships between higher ed institutions and private employers or public employers to bridge the gap and make sure that we are training the next generation of manufacturers, public safety, teachers, workers in healthcare, and so that people have jobs and opportunity more than anything else.
And if you are able to pass legislation the legislation that you were just describing, how far do you think we are, and do you actually think that the American dream will be attainable to residents of Connecticut again?
I think we're getting there, right? We're cutting taxes. I think the governor has turned our state around economically. Businesses are giving us a second look. We're paying down our unfunded pension liabilities for the longer term, so that future generations are saddled with less debt, and it's freeing up more money to invest in programs for the future. I think if we work to incentivize responsible development in things like middle housing, so that people, in my case, for example, don't just have to choose between a multi-million-dollar mansion or a small apartment like what we're in now, and instead maybe have a townhouse or a backyard, and you can kind of transition along into housing. You can start to address some of these issues if we can get our utility costs under control, if we can hold the line on taxes while fulfilling some of the obligations that we need, especially things like nonprofits. We can start to get ahead here. It took, unfortunately, years to get here, and it's not going to take days to get out of it. But we stopped digging ourselves in this hole, and we're actually building something that I think is going to be a huge opportunity for people. And people are giving Connecticut a second look. They're moving here. They're raising a family here. We've got great schools, good jobs, and I think it's going to be something that we've got to keep building on if we're going to continue to turn things around.
And on that positive note, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, what is your favorite part about working in public service, and what makes you go to work every day?
I think as cliche as it sounds, it's nice to see something that you were a part of having a positive impact on people's lives. During the chaos of the pandemic, when I was working in the governor's office and we saw the distribution of PPE that helped to save lives, when we saw the small business loans that kept some small businesses afloat, when we saw the investments in clean air systems in schools so the kids could have a better air to breathe. That's really the rewarding part, is seeing how something that you're working with other people on to invest in and make a difference in are actually having the positive impact. Some of those small businesses were able to stay afloat and keep their employees employed. Kids are now breathing better air in our schools, which is hugely important from a public health perspective. We've now done a tremendous job in making sure our healthcare is sort of better suited for something like that in the future. And Connecticut's leadership during that difficult time certainly stood out among the nation. And so it's refreshing to see you make a difference, whether it's small, like on the RTM, if you're voting on a teacher contract to give them higher pay for the hard work that they do. That teacher now has more money in their pocket for their family, and we're going to keep them here for the kids in this community. When teachers are faced with layoffs and you can vote to make good investments in education, that person gets to keep their job. Those are really the rewarding parts of public service, when you see the benefit and the impact on so many.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me here today. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much, Arav, for having me. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to me at rob@robblanchardct.com or visit robblanchardct.com. I hope to earn your vote on Tuesday, November 5th, and kind of be the voice for this district and a new generation of leadership. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard, and best of luck on your race. Peace out, political peeps.